Hello, this is Stephen Boylan from Eason.com, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Arne Dahl, who is joining us today, and his new book, Europa Blues, has just been published by Random House. Arne, thank you very much for coming to us today. Tell us a little bit about Europa Blues and how the book came about.
Yes, I was writing a series of 10 books. I had decided from the outset that it was going to be 10 books in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was some kind of attempt to talk about Sweden going more international in general. This is book number 4 in this series. Mm-hmm. It's quite possible to read it as a standalone, but you could also read it as part of the series. This particular book started out with the insight of what is now called trafficking, the prostitution problems with Eastern European women, mm-hmm. more or less being sold in Western Europe. Mm-hmm. And this was a bit of a shock to me at that time, because it was written a few years ago. It's been translated rather late, but it's still very contemporary in the sense that nowadays we are talking about trafficking, and we are aware of the phenomenon. And I just felt that this attitude towards human value in general had so many connections to the Second World War and the concentration camps. And when you stop looking at people as people, start to look at them as commodities or financial values or just crap or you know. So there are connections between an old story from the Second World War and it's also connected to mafia today and mafia involved in trafficking. Yeah. So it's a sort of mixture of a few different stories that are welded together.
And it's still a very high profile kind of topic of debate in Sweden, the kind of all-around. Yes. The book was originally written in 2004, I think. So it's still very much on the agenda.
Yes. Yeah. It's also a little bit about Sweden's not so much spoken of past in the field of race biology in the 20s. And it was really, we were on the front line of race.
I suppose the series is interesting insofar as a lot of crime writers nowadays have kind of one single character that kind of drives the series, whereas the Inter-Crime Team is a group of 6 detectives. Why did you decide to take that plural approach rather than just focusing on one character?
I was looking for a way of telling a sort of collective story. I was a little bit tired of the traditional male, middle-aged detective that's always working alone, being slightly depressed, having small alcohol problems. And I thought, if I'm going to write 10 books in 10 years, I need to stay interested in the characters. Mm-hmm. And of course the readers as well must be allowed to stay interested in the characters. So it's much more interesting to have several characters that can be, well, somebody is very strong in book number 4 and somebody is very strong in book number 3, and they have internal relationships that are also very important and that can develop over time. So I thought it was a good way to get away from the standard way of telling a crime story.
As you say, I mean, you set out to write 10 books in 10 years, which is a huge project. Obviously took a huge amount of planning. From an individual book basis, how do you start? I mean, do you start with the ending and go, what the sort of story I want to tell and this is how it's going to finish up, or do you start with a premise and kind of work from there?
I start in general with something that makes me upset in contemporary society, one way or another, something that keeps the fire burning throughout the writing. It can't ever be just a case that needs to be solved. It has to be personal. You have to feel it, that it's important to write about it. So it always starts out with those more or less authentic crimes. I sort of pick it from the news flow. And it's usually a couple of different crimes being committed at the same time, and they belong together in a different way. And that means I have to plan it. So I know, not from the outset, how it's going to and I know when I'm planning it what makes sense.
Yeah.
So in general, if you divide authors into two characters, those who just write and see what happens, and those who plan very carefully, I'm more planning, more writing.
Great. Obviously, the television shows on BBC4 over here that's hugely successful. And what was it like to work on that? Were you heavily involved in that, or did you kind of take a step back and let other people work away on that?
You can have very different approaches when your books are being shot. For me, it was very important that it was close to my books, and that I felt that the characters that I had created and had lived with for such a long time were well portrayed. And I think so. I was very much involved in choosing the actors actually. And there were different, and some of them were really very much like I imagined them.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting, and it was a good way to work with them. And then I read the scripts. The scripts keep coming, you know, in that world, as opposed to the book world where it's pretty set. That's when you get the version 26B or something like that. You feel, okay, I've read this a lot of times now. But in general, we worked pretty well together, me and Rolf and Silverberg, who wrote and they became crime fiction writers themselves after having written this. So we worked well together.
Perfect. You're a big crime reader. I presume, do you like to read outside of crime books, or is crime your main thing that you like to read?
From the outset, I was not a crime writer really. In my real name, which is Jan Arnold, it's not very important. But then I was more into classical literature in different ways, or modern, more experimental kind of things. So I tend to read both crime fiction and, you know, other kinds of, mostly novels, I would say, after all. But in crime fiction, when I started writing crime fiction, I didn't really want to read very much because it was important to find your own voice, your own fingerprint, really, in this vast universe of crime fiction. You have to find your own niche. And but when I found that, I started to read again very much, because when I was a kid, I read so much crime fiction, far too much for my own, for my age.
Obviously, we're big fans of books here in Eason, so do you have any recent recommendations, anything that you've just finished reading that you can recommend to people?
Yes, I had a very big literary experience in the crime fiction field, and that was Don Winslow, The Cartel, which is about Mexican drug gangs and drug war, the war against drugs, really. And it was very disturbing how these things can go on in our society. It's a little bit like this in a way, in Europa Blues. Things are going on in our society and we close our eyes to it.
Very good. Europa Blues, published by Harvard & Secker, is available at easons.com and all Eason stores. Jan, Arne, thank you very much for coming to see us, and we'll see you soon.